What's up, guys? Coming at you from Shenzhen as usual, but drinking a less usual tea for me. It's a pu'er. Usually you see me drinking other kinds of teas, but today I'm trying something different. And the video will be a bit different too, because I had a few fun things to talk about, but I want to go on a little bit of a rant instead. I want to talk about my issues with some of the foreign governments that are handling this issue right now. I want to talk about some issues with some people who are still just pointing fingers in this direction, and I want to talk about some problems I have with the local government here in China. So first of all, I want to say that we're still doing everything we should be doing here. A lot of the businesses are still closed. We're having our temperature checked as we come in and out. All of the precautions are being put in place to make sure we catch anybody who has any sort of coronavirus-like symptoms, treat them early enough to increase their chance of survival, and also to protect the community and quarantine certain communities if there is a confirmed case that pops up. Then, of course, the stark contrast is, how foreign governments are handling this. The story I mentioned of my friend's niece in the U.S. who, when they had a dinner party and somebody flew over from Chongqing, the daughter came down. My friend's niece came down with coronavirus-like symptoms, pneumonia symptoms. None of the clinics, none of the hospitals would agree to test her. And I said, because you have to come from Wuhan yourself or have contact with a confirmed case to be tested. And so, of course, if she does in fact have coronavirus, she will continue to infect other people, and nobody will ever get checked because nobody ever gets a chance to become confirmed, to meet that criteria. So that's a pretty concerning way that it might spiral out of control. But then there was a news story from Hawaii where Hawaii, maybe there's an irony in there somewhere where, 80 odd years after being bombed by Japan, they're now going to Japan for help because they can't rely on their own central government. They were sent faulty test kits, new test kits won't come for a while, and the CDC there's a proposal to cut their budget by another 16% despite this showing that they need a lot more support. And while this is all going on, I want to talk about the people who still, even through this, are just pointing fingers. Whether it be, and I know that represents a small majority of people. I know that there's plenty of media and there's plenty of people that appreciate all the efforts that China is going through right now to try to contain this, and who are self-aware about their own issues with their own governments. There's plenty of people like that. But what these people do, especially politicians who should be held to account for this, or even the anti-China YouTubers that I used to speak about. And I know you might be thinking, why talk about these guys again? Because they're just guys who, they bash China all day long, and when they bash China, their perception of how things work here is layered in their own personal issues and pessimism. But here's the problem, is what you're supposed to have overseas, which people think they don't have in China, which they do, but I'm not going to get into that misconception now. But what people think they're supposed to have overseas is a government where people can stand up, they can demand more, they can hold them accountable. But these people, what they're doing is they're trying to convince others to be as complacent as they are, to lack as much self-awareness as they lack, and to just not be introspective at all. And so it creates a lost opportunity where people should be putting more pressure on their own governments to do as much as we're doing here. And they just kind of want to point fingers. Of course, they want to point fingers and say, well, it originated here, so I'm just going to keep pointing fingers at that. But there's a few problems with that. You didn't have the same kind of criticism towards America, or the Americas in general, when H1N1 came out of there and, by some measures, killed hundreds of thousands of people around the world. You certainly couldn't find a politician from China saying something like politicians in the U.S., like Wilbur Ross said, when they said, this coronavirus situation in China is going to be great for the U.S. economy. Good luck in finding anybody here who says anything like that. Because China, I don't know what it is they're just playing Mr. Nice Guy when it comes to this kind of stuff. And then the other problem is, too, is if you think about the mismanagement in the beginning of this whole thing, which is debatable also, but which I also said there was definitely mismanagement, and you look at the month that they lost, also consider that in mid-January, they already genome sequenced this virus, the DNA of this virus, in record time, and also made it public to the entire world so that everybody could start preparing themselves with test kits and they know what's coming. And during that time, I and some other people like me would say things like, this would never happen at this speed with foreign governments. And now we're seeing that firsthand. It's been a month since that DNA sequencing came out, and America is still sending out faulty test kits. And they're still not going to have new proper test kits until mid-March or whatever it is. So we're seeing exactly what people like me said in this point. But still, people overseas are just pointing fingers, and they want to convince people to lack the same amount of self-awareness, like I mentioned, which is probably good for foreign governments, because if their own people are so busy pointing fingers at other people all the time, they're not going to be held accountable themselves. So maybe that's part of the point, where they just get people kind of, acting like zombies when it comes to things like this in terms of logic. But the problem I have now with the local government here is that, well, first of all, I'll say is that all of these countries that put travel restrictions in place from China, or funnel you through certain airports, or put requirements in place for you to go into quarantine, I accept it. I said that's probably a good idea, even though it affects me personally when I want to go somewhere, even if I have something urgent I've got to do in Hong Kong. If I go to Hong Kong, I got to be quarantined for 14 days. I understand it. On the ground here, we understand that our businesses haven't been able to open. We're losing money. There are people who are putting their business up for sale and all this kind of stuff. And we understand because shit happens. This is something that happened, and we're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to work together. But when people come here, and my friend just told me he came today back from the U.S., which is a country whose numbers are probably way worse than what's reported, which is ironic. That's what's being accused of China, right? Who there's clear evidence of total mismanagement of this issue. And they can fly over here, no restrictions at all. They just have to fill in a questionnaire, get their temperature checked, and welcome to China. So all of the numbers are under control here. We've gone through great sacrifice here. And because China's still playing Mr. Nice Guy, or whatever the heck the reason is, they're not putting the same restrictions on people coming back here, even though arguably this is going to be one of the safest places to be soon. Why? Why? I accepted that I had to download these apps so that you could track me as I go around, and so that you could, well, granted, I received something from it too in case I was exposed. I'm notified. I accepted that my business is closed, my brew pub is closed, and I'm losing money, and I'm still paying my staff, and this is going to be a really difficult time to get through. I've accepted all of it. But now, you're just throwing it back in our faces. Why? Why should we have done all of this? If you're not going to control people who are coming in the same way that we're controlled when we go to foreign countries from China. You've absolutely wasted our efforts here, and you're going to lose my support. I'm going to bring this up with a few people. I'm going to see if people can think about changing this. And sorry, I'm not calling you out, the guy, because the guy who told me he came back today, he watches my videos. I'm not calling you out. I'm glad you're okay and everything like that. But this is just an insult to what we've been doing here. Our kids aren't going to school. They're cooped up at home. We're playing along. And people like me have been singing the praises of what people have been doing here. Not only the government, but the people in terms of playing along. I'm not going to be doing that anymore if you're just going to screw it up like this and you're just going to throw it back in our faces. I better stop here because I can keep rambling on and on about this, but I needed to get that off my chest. This is my issue with foreign governments. This is my issue with people still pointing fingers here, lacking any self-awareness whatsoever, full of ignorance. And this is my problem with the local government here now. This is my problem with the Chinese government here now. So I want to get back to something a little bit more lighthearted to speak about tomorrow, but I really wanted to get that off my chest because that was bothering me today. Got to cut it there. So as usual, guys, stay safe, take all the precautions you should be taking, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace.